All right. Welcome, everyone. This is a monthly meeting of the COO Forum. The COO Forum is a global organization dedicated to operational excellence and helping operations leaders network with each other from around the world, and this in particular, then the Tampa Bay chapter. Today, we have a special guest, John Foster, who is a managing member at Pathfinder Group, is joining me to do a presentation on the three dimensions of business growth and then growth strategies, which I will do. John, how about you introduce yourself and take over?
All right, let me see if I can, let's see, we'll stop there. Let's share my screen and get over while we're doing this. Well, my name is John Foster. I am the managing partner of Pathfinder Group, and we're an organization that deals extensively with family businesses, not exclusively, but ostensibly with family businesses, helping them increase value. And we're going to talk a little bit about value. What does that mean? But the thing that I think it's fair to say that most owners want to be successful, but not everybody wants the same thing. The majority of business owners want to grow their businesses. We know that. A percentage of them want to free up time by improving operations, and and that means that in many cases they feel enslaved by the business. And I'm sure some of you out there can relate to that, where you just don't have time to enjoy the lifestyle that you're creating because of the demands of the business. And mostly those demands are tied back to inefficiencies, which we're going to talk about. And then 17% of those businesses are really preparing for a transition. It might be a sale externally or an internal transfer to the next generation. Could be a management buyout. But the bottom line, most businesses have to grow. But just how do you do that? I mean, it seems so straightforward in many instances, but what do you actually have to do that'll get the results you want? And when you start putting pen to paper, it's not so clear. There are so many choices, and each choice carries risk. So what if I place the wrong bet? Can I recover? Few of us have the cash reserves to make too many mistakes. And so gaining clarity around those choices is critical. And that's really what I want to talk about. How do you gain clarity? We're going to talk about a tool that we use. This is a tool that was developed at MIT. It uses artificial intelligence to try to gain some objective insights into businesses and provide that clarity. And here's a slide of some of the users, and you can read it, but I want to point out two in particular. NACVA, which is the National Association that accredits evaluators and analysts. And this is an organization that endorses this product for its accuracy. And we're going to talk about the product later, although this is not a sales pitch. I just want to give you the insights to the product. And then the other one is Key Private Bank. Key Private Bank is using this in their wealth management division, principally to help businesses de-risk their businesses and improve the value. And we're going to talk about what that means in terms of the impact on quality of earnings, and just what quality of earnings really means in terms of getting to something we're going to talk about as aspirational value. So it helps, I think, to think of your business as an engine. Any of us that are old enough to have worked on cars that didn't require a PhD to work on knows that the inputs are critical to the outputs or the performance of that engine. And so if you fail to get those inputs right, or fail to get the right inputs right, then your competitiveness starts to wane, the profits fall, the engine sputters, and you may be out of business. And so we're going to talk about just how you can address that. To get clarity on those inputs, we look at 18 value drivers that impact performance. 9 of them are macroeconomic and look outward into the environment that you compete in. And 9 of them are microeconomic and look inward. Understand influence that each of these has, remove confusion that we mentioned earlier about where to allocate resources. And that's an important aspect. We don't have limited resources. And so we have to place our bets judiciously. And oftentimes we rely on data, maybe imperfect data. We rely on or integrate intuition with that. But at the end of the day, we have limited resources and we need to place our bets where they're going to have the greatest impact on the business, or we're going to at least improve the probabilities that the outcomes that we expect are the ones that we're going to experience. Here's a quick glimpse at a report that is generated when you take this survey that addresses 18 questions on those value drivers. I'll quickly take you through the initial report we generate just to give you a feel. It'll help with what follows in this presentation. But on this page, the owner can view the current estimated or potential value of their business. This is not a valuation, and I want to emphasize that. Valuations are pretty sophisticated and take into consideration far more variables than this does, although NACFA says this comes within 5 to 10% of evaluation. So for the purposes of teeing up a conversation with owners of businesses to get clarity on what's working and what's not working, is extremely effective. We also display the top 3 areas where their businesses that are contributing to the most friction to growth. In this case, it's sales and marketing, margin, and growth. And in addition, let me just go back up to the top for a second. In addition to showing the potential value, we showed the current enterprise value, and the difference between those two creates a gap. And that difference, that enterprise value, is really the value with risk priced in. It's the value that you might expect to see after a due diligence has been done and after the negotiations have happened in a business. And it's important to understand that because it does point to the things that are working and that are not working from the perspective of a potential investor. So we also assign a rating, a score really, that acts as a proxy for how confident a potential investor would be in replicating the current results. Pretty helpful. In this example, the rating is about 52%. And we know that in order to transfer the rating, to be transferable, that rating should exceed 80. What I'm saying here is that most businesses go to market and fail to sell, or if they sell at deep discounts to what the listing has been. And this is not about selling the business, but it's helpful to understand your business from the perspective of a potential buyer. And that's the perspective I want you to consider as we go through this. Most businesses, when they score in the 50 to 60% range. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. And then we show where the subject ranks on the top 3 friction points relative to their competitors in the industry and how much opportunity there is by moving to the right. And you can see here, we do that for each one of the drivers that we're sharing with them. And then finally, this aspect of the report shows any red flags. Think of red flags as existential threats to the business. These are the kind of things that'll kill a deal. But even if there's no deal anticipated, they are incredible impediments to driving value in the business, and they've got to be addressed. They could come in the form of HR issues. in the form of misaligned management, in the form of very thin bench strength. And so it's important to understand where these risks, where these red flags lie, because their impact is directly related to the quality of earnings and ultimately the value of the company. You may know that private equity owns about 30% of the companies within that $5 to $100 million revenue range. And the best candidates all have strong management teams that can execute a well-designed plan supported by facts that show a clear path to sustained growth. And to the degree they can execute, and the best teams usually can, is a degree to which the quality of earnings are going to be greater. And so is the value being created. And Tracy's going to talk a little bit about this as we get into the nuts and bolts of implementation. We want to emphasize that the three dimensions of growth really focuses on these growth drivers. If we had unlimited resources, this might be less important, but we don't. So gaining clarity, and I'm going to keep saying it, around which drivers matter most and when helps inform resource decision and increases the likelihood of the outcomes. The performance we want from that engine is what we're driving for. And this is the heart of mitigating the risk of misallocation. So doing this provides the foundational strength to sustain our growth trajectory, which, as you'll see, is based on cash flow first. This article in Financial Intelligence noted that the businesses most able to invest in growth are those that could generate their own cash. Make no mistake about it, growth is expensive and takes a commitment, mental and physical and emotional. And so we start with cash flow and predictable profits as the first dimension. And when you look at this Venn diagram or variant of a Venn diagram, keep in mind in the center the goals noted earlier that a CEO has. They generally include sustainable growth. They want to improve operations, whether they're positioning to sell or just enjoy the business that they have, or position for transition. And the three dimensions begin with cash flow and predictable profits. You can't have predictable profits until you have predictable cash flow. And moving to predictable profits means forecasting your need for cash and having access to it from either receivables, credit, or equity infusions. Once you've established predictable cash flow and well, then revenue growth is next. And done right and built on the first dimension, increases in revenue growth will be more sustainable. All else being equal, we'll then move into the final third dimension. And I should say, this movement isn't linear necessarily, although we'll get into a workflow that kind of explains why certain elements of each dimension are critical as predecessor events. But this final dimension, the third dimensional, is really about transferable value. While it's about the equity you build, that equity, that real transferable value, and what I'll refer to as aspirational value, is all about quality of earnings. So the dimensions are not phases, as I mentioned. You move through linearly. They're interrelated. Each of them has 8 distinct OKRs. And I know this audience is certainly familiar with objectives and key results. They're divided amongst the 9 internal and 9 external drivers I mentioned at the outset. All 3 of these dimensions exist within that fourth dimension, time. Most of you will be familiar with some of this. The OKRs, this goal setting framework that I mentioned, is used by organizations to define measurable goals and track their outcomes. OKRs are the magic behind the incredible success of companies like Google and the Gates Foundation. And Andy Grove, who I met in the 90s through an organization I was involved with, taught them to John Doerr, who really popularized them in his bestseller, Measure What Matters. And so in looking at the three dimensions, it's important to understand that the growth drive methodology that we're discussing today uses this framework and in part explains its success. So here's how the growth drive methodology and the three dimensions of business helps owners realize their goals. We want to align a client's goals with the dimensions most important to them and show them how the dots get connected in each instance. So if growth is what the goal is, we focus on cash flow. And then cash flow and profits are followed by predictable growth. And so those represents dimensions 1 and dimensions 2. If freeing up the owner to make life easier is the goal, focusing on cash flow becomes most important. And then finally, if the client is angling to sell internally or externally, keeping an eye on how each decision enhances the quality of earnings to ensure transferable value is of primary importance. And so there's some synchronicity in understanding how each of the dimensions applies to the goals of the business owner and the timing of their introduction. So let's take a look at them one at a time. This is the first dimension. There are 8 OKRs, mostly with an internal and operational focus. The other dimensions will build on this, so building strong here is critical. The emphasis throughout this dimension is on the role cash flow has in making everything else possible. It's how we'll finance that growth. Done well, value at the current income levels will be improved, which is to say that the primary focus is not new revenue, though sales might increase. This is where strategic growth starts. And based on the initial analysis, owners get a better sense of what needs to be done to shore up their launch pad for what follows. Dimension 2 leverages the OKRs in dimension 1, where cash flow became more predictable. Owners better understand now the relationship between cash and growth. They better understand that excessive sales growth can put you out of business without the underlying cash to support that growth. But with cash flow more predictable, we shift our attention to growing the top line revenue. This is the dimension where starting to move forward in terms of value from additional sale, different profits starts to take place. We continue with the internal drivers like documentation and important contribution to quality of earnings. And now we begin including a macroeconomic view to the business, thinking growth to value creation. Activating that first dimension's predictable cash flow and profits can maximize the value of your business at today's revenues. That's what we mean by moving in several dimensions at once. And I'll show you this graphically in a minute or two. The third dimension is really about leveraging the best practices you've brought into the business during those first 2 dimensions, and now shooting for aspirational value. This is the value that delivers the highest multiples in your industry, the kind of multiples that only come with high quality of earnings. That quality of earnings that PE, or private equity, likes to see, but all too often don't. So as a practical matter, time, the client's goals, and the current state of the company are the real determining factors. So let's remember that time. That might be the biggest factor facing a transition. 4x ago, that point in the cycle that is a seller's market is an external factor. It comes around every 10 years. You might be able to time it with planning, but you can't control that point in the cycle. So by positioning the company to achieve its aspirational value using the OKRs in each of the 3 dimensions, owners can better position themselves for an exit during the strong seller phase in the business cycle. This might well be the largest transaction of an owner's life. So positioning through planning affords them the greatest range of options when they choose to pull the trigger. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about, pulling the trigger on their terms. So before we leave the dimensions and venture into the specific OKRs, it's worth sharing that many owners incorrectly assume revenues and value are connected, and they really aren't, at least not like they think. It's not automatic that one flows from the other. Done right, every dollar of new EBITDA or cash flow is worth 5 or 6 at the deal table. If you do it wrong, that number's closer to 1 or 2, if it's worth anything at all. And that's not hyperbolic. Far too many companies, as I mentioned earlier, sell at these deep discounts or don't sell at all. So let's take a closer look at the 3 dimensions of growth and what I meant by aspirational value. If you look at the base of this pyramid, it focuses on predictable profits and cash flow, that bottom 1/3. It's really about understanding how you can mitigate risk. And if you look at the small print, you'll see that the EBITDA here is 1.2. And given their current state, in an industry where the valuation multiples are trading from 2 to 6, this company comes up at 2. So its estimated value or indicated value is really about $2.4 million. Growth financed by the cash flow is the next stage, while continuing to mitigate risk and focusing on improved quality of earnings as they move up the pyramid. And from that vantage point, you want to drive to aspirational value from the growth in revenue built on the foundation of quality and risk mitigation to maximize industry multiple. The goal then is to climb the pyramid one section at a time through each dimension, reducing risk by improving that quality of earnings, growing revenue from internally generated cash flow, and ultimately maximizing real transferable value for the benefit of you and your family. If you notice that in that first foundational dimension, simply de-risking the company without additional revenues and moving the attractiveness, the predictability of outcomes in a favorable direction moves the multiple. And so I've illustrated here that the potential is to move it from a multiple of 2 to 1 of 6, which even with the current state of EBITDA, 1.2, moves it from a valuation of 2.4 million to 7.2 million. It's a significant gap. And I think it makes the point pretty convincingly that understanding that value is not necessarily linked to revenue is pretty strong. So the route to aspirational value is through aspirational revenues. Get clarity around what's holding you back, implement best practices, which we identify to address those bottlenecks, and then find the company's rhythm to build momentum towards the goal. Earlier, I said revenue doesn't in and of itself build value. And value happens when the discount for risk is small. The discount for risk is small when a buyer has confidence in those earnings. It might be helpful to think of those earnings as a proxy for good governance, strong management, and promising future. And that's why we talk about it in terms of the quality of those earnings. This is what it looks like graphically. I know it's a busy slide. It illustrates how doubling your EBITDA can increase your value 6-fold by focusing on growth from quality and risk mitigation. But it's what we mean when we talk about understanding the relationship between these 3 dimensions: the cash flow, the profits, the growth, and the creation of value. I pointed out earlier that along the bottom of the pyramid, You saw that EBITDA 1.2 was worth 2.4. Well, when we start to grow revenues, it blows past that 7.2 million as long as the quality of earnings is strong. If that foundation has been built with an eye towards mitigating risk, it's been successfully discounted by the way of accomplishing the specific OKRs. That's how you mitigate the risk. And that $1 of EBITDA will add 6 in value. In this example, doubling that EBITDA increases the value by $12 million. That's smart, deliberate growth with an understanding of the relationship between and amongst these 3 dimensions. So here's a sample workflow plan for closing the gap between the current enterprise value and the potential value that I mentioned earlier. If we correct the deficiencies and score each at 10 while growing revenue, we'll be on our way towards that aspirational value. So let me just break this down. Let's look on the left-hand column. We see the 8 areas that this particular example, this business is going to focus on. And we score each one of the areas, the functional areas of a business, to see where they currently are. And you can see the score. We'll use financial as an example. They scored at a 2.8. Other issues or other factors scored higher. But let's just take the financial as an example to illustrate the meaning of this chart. This company is going to focus in 90 days, a 90-day sprint on financial and HR. The scores start out at 2.8 and 4.8 respectively. The goal is during that sprint, applying OKRs from dimension 1 to move that score to a 7. And then in the next 90 days, drop down to the next 2 initiatives and grow them to 7 in that 90 days period. Doesn't mean that the first 2 initiatives are going to be abandoned, but continue working on those, moving towards a score of 10. And when we do that over 1 or 2 or 3 years and move all of those functional areas to a score of 10, in this case, we're adding 3.4 of $3.7 million in value to this owner's business. And that's what we intend to do. At this point, we can walk alongside of an owner. We can walk behind them and be available to coach them. We can lead the process and walk in front of them. But at the end of the day, this is really a workflow chart that can quantify the impact that these sprints are having on value. And Tracy's going to talk a little bit more about the granular framework of really making this a reality. So using this as the timeline for addressing the deficiencies differ from one company to another. Some owners have the luxury of time, while others are facing a real or imagined deadline. Others have different goals entirely. And which of these dimensions we tackle and how we tackle it is dependent on that situation. That said, as you look at the headings up here, I know you're recognizing facets of your business that need work in those specific areas. This is a chart of the 8 OKRs within each of the 3 dimensions. Depending on an owner's timeline, they might take up to a year to focus on each dimension. But irrespective of how long they have to work on their problems, their interests would be best served beginning on those OKRs in the first dimension. Addressing these offers the best promise of building a strong launch pad for sustainable growth. So these 2 dimensions represent the bulk of the work and pave the way to accomplishing that aspirational value we talked about. The OKRs in one dimension do not have to be completed before moving into the subsequent dimension. These are not based on phases, they're interactive. The point is that you're working on them methodically. And since we take a holistic approach to growth and growth aligned with the owner's goals, it's important to focus on those areas that achieve what the owner wants. We discussed 21% of owners just wanting to make life easier in the business for them. Well, focusing on dimension one might be the right prescription for them. For those hell-bent on selling, but whose timeline is short, focusing on the first and third dimension might make more sense. And then for that 17% who don't want to sell or who do want to sell and who have a longer timeline, moving through each of the dimensions, as the analysis suggests, will do the most for positioning the company in the marketplace and for surviving the due diligence process with the value intact. So as I recap, one of the things that got me interested in helping small businesses and in particular family businesses is that they account for 51% of GDP in this country and just over 80% of new job creation. Yet they do such a poor job of transitioning either out of the business or to the next generation. And depending on the source you refer to, only 1 in 20 really succeed in their exit. And that's a problem. Understanding the 3 dimensions of growth, how it improves the quality of earnings and the impact quality of earnings has on value is how to improve the odds that more business owners will actually realize their version of the American dream for themselves and their families. This is a holistic methodology. It's flexible in meeting the top goals of the CEOs, provides a solid foundation for growth, introduces owners to the concept of transferable value, and provides the means for making goals actionable. And making them actionable is all about execution, which is what Tracy's going to talk about. So Tracy, do I need to stop sharing in order for you to pick up from here?
Sure, go ahead and to see if we have any questions before we proceed. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, good morning, gentlemen. John and Tracy, sorry I'm a little late, but
Good morning.
I do have a few questions, but maybe I'll wait until Tracy finish. It's up to you.
That's up to you. If you want to, feel free if you want to go ahead and ask your questions for John's portion.
So, John, per your excuse me, per your looks like a Gantt chart where it's showing finance and HR as the most let's say return on investment if you take it from 1 to 10. Am I correct? They were highlighted in green.
Correct.
Okay, and it sounds like, can you give me like the top 5 aspects from finance and top 5 aspects from HR that you would change today that really increase that significantly? Because I feel in the end of the day, it's an 80-20 rule, meaning you perhaps can do just fine tuning from a finance and HR perspective that really results in perhaps an 80% value in that.
So let me give you some examples of what you could do in finance. First of all, having a good strategic CFO is critical. Setting up internal controls over financial reporting, critical. Being able to close the books every month within the first 8 days of the following month, pretty important. Having those policies and procedures in writing so that they're easy to transfer or train with, pretty important. Those are elements of finance, just a few elements of finance that indicate that this company is buttoned down. And then I go back to reinforcing the importance of a CFO who's got a strategic mindset, because helping to develop a capital stack that can assist growth is critical. Understanding from a risk mitigation perspective, choices that are going to be made in growing the business, pretty critical. If growth is going to be accompanied by acquisitions as opposed to organic growth, pretty important to have a strategic CFO at the table. In HR, culture is one of the biggest ones. So many of the flags that we see, that when I say red flags, when I referred to the red flags earlier, the red flags that we see in HR have to do with EEOC issues, a hostile environment where the culture is not very strong, or where turnover is great because clarity of mission is lacking. People don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and so there's no purpose in the work that they do. And believe it or not, that's got a strong correlation between being able to retain those people that you're hiring, and the impact of retention is directly related to the institutional knowledge that you build over time that can improve your margins because of lower costs. So those are just two examples of what might surface in finance and HR when we're doing a deep dive analysis for a client.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the feedback. The second question, based on the pyramid you provided earlier, you showed the growth, risk, and cash flow as three aspects that may control the business. Will it matter if whoever gonna inquire the business is a strategic buyer or not a strategic buyer? Would that matter, especially from a growth perspective? Because sometimes it would be kind of, it's good to see growth, but it depends on the buyer. Sometimes they would want to see that potential.
That's a great question, and it goes to the heart of goes to the heart of the range in buyer motivation. So if I'm a strategic buyer, I might not be as interested in your cash flow if I've got the cash flow, and buying you positions me in the marketplace to have a platform to accomplish whatever my larger goals are. So cash flow might not have that much of an impact. However, if you have high quality of earnings as the seller and a strategic buyer comes in, it just reinforces the multiple that you are trying for at the negotiation table. That buyer may be willing to pay a premium anyways because of what they can accomplish with this acquisition. But you as the seller want to maximize that. And certainly one of the things that most sellers don't really fully understand is the implication on the net walkaway number that taxes and fees have. So having good quality in your business and having that associated with an understanding of the exit options is part of the process we recommend, so that when you're negotiating with that strategic buyer, you're negotiating from a position of strength. If that owner is interested in any of the other options for transition or exit, having good value, good quality in the earnings from cash flow, predictable profitability, plays a strong hand. If I'm going to sell to my employees as an ESOP, I look a lot more attractive to a bank as a lender in that process than if I didn't have good cash flow and predictable profits. If I'm going to sell to my management team, I have much greater confidence in holding a note that's going to be paid by the predictable cash flow and profitability of that business. So I would say in most cases, if not all cases, focusing on predictable cash flow, whether you're going to grow or not, has value.
Absolutely. Thank you for your feedback, John.
Sure. You're welcome.
No, no more questions.
All
Thank
right,
you.
guys. Good discussion. Good points. Thank you. So what I want to do is go kind of into the weeds a little more. John is talking about the overall strategy in terms of, the building the business. And I'm going to talk about a few things that are very complementary, actually, in some cases, directly related to what John was talking about that can help with that. So first off, I'm talking about growth strategies. We're going to start with EOS. This is something I think everybody's kind of familiar with. And I know you are. And so the EOS is the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And one of the challenges that any company that's growing, especially that has more of a startup, or even if it's fairly successful, up to several hundred people, is you often have not really a strategy as much as different people that maybe are the founders that have been calling the shots and doing things. There's not a good process, good clarity. As John is a word that used several times. You need clarity in how you're going to operate the business. And EOS brings structure to chaos. And it does it by there's 6 components. One of those is the vision. It's who do we want to be? Where are we going? And we're going to dig into these a little more. Data is all about leading and lagging indicators. EOS is really strongly focused on data. Don't just make decisions based on emotions or, hey, I have a gut feeling. Let's look at hard facts and let's look at them on a cadence, on a regular basis. Another thing John talked about that greatly improves the value to potential investors is process. Do you have well-defined processes? Are they published? Are they across the company? Everybody knows how we're going to do business. It shows that you're organized, that you're well thought out, and this is very attractive for investors. Another thing is traction. This is how we're going to accomplish our goals. One of the cornerstones of traction is the level 10 meeting, which I'm going to dig into a little more. And then you have issues, identify your issues, and we call it IDS in the Entrepreneurial Operating System in EOS. That's you identify, you discuss, you solve. A lot of times companies identify an issue, they park it, and it comes back 3 months later that nothing was ever done about it. EOS is take action now. Don't put things off. Let's figure this problem out. Let's get it done. And of course, finally, people. We make sure that the organization is properly defined. We make sure we have the right people in place. So let's dig a little deeper into some of these components. And EOSworldwide.com has more information on it as well. And there's a great podcast by them. So first off, some of the tools within EOS are the VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer. In the VTO, there are 8 questions. What are your core values? That sounds easy. A lot of companies think, hey, we're going to define our core values. Hey, that's no big deal. You'd be surprised how complex that is. And when you first start down the EOS path, over the first 6 months, you'll probably change those 10 times as you really start to get that clarity on who you are and who you want to be. And what's your core focus as a business? What's your 10-year target? Now, that's not really detailed. It's more, where do we want to be in 10 years? Do we want to be a company that gets sold? Do we want to go public? What are our goals? Or do we want to have a handoff to the next generation? What's our marketing strategy look like? What's our 3-year picture? What's our 1-year plan? Something called ROCs. ROCs are our objectives that we're shooting for, typically quarterly and annually. And then what issues do we face as a business? And we work through VTO and get our vision and our traction and organized, and we start following it. Second component are scorecards. I brought this up as part of data. These are things that happen every week, month, quarter, year. What is going on in our business? We have goals on our scorecards. Are we hitting our goals? Are we missing? Why? Leading and lagging indicators. Again, a lagging indicator is something that's already happened. A leading indicator is what we want to happen. A combination of the two helps you measure progress. Something called LMA, Leadership, Management, and Accountability. It's an important concept that EOS brings into the company. It's not just leadership, isn't just calling the shots and giving orders. It's setting an example, and then how you manage the business, holding people accountable. And part of that, of course, is the accountability chart. People talk about organization charts. Accountability takes that to the next step. The accountability chart is for this role. Give me those 3 to 7 things that role is accountable for. And I call it a role and not a person, because people fit into roles. You define your roles, you define your accountability chart, then you can look at how you put people inside of those roles. You don't build an accountability chart around personalities. You build it for the success of the business and to achieve your strategic goals. Another thing is GWC. This is one of my favorite terms in life. Anybody who knows me, works with me, knows that I will talk about GWC. It means, do you get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? This is an approach to hiring and keeping people and growing people. If you have a position in the accountability chart and you think, okay, I want to take this person and I'm going to put them in that position, do they really get the position? Do they really understand it? Because if they don't, they're going to fail. Do they want it? You don't just promote somebody because you think they're going to do good. Maybe they didn't want it. Next thing you know, they quit or they fail. And do they have the capacity to do it? Now, capacity can be skill set. It can be the hours they're available. It can be the fact that maybe they have a family and they don't want to have a 60-hour week, right? We want to have balance in life that maybe that position doesn't have. So you got to watch that and make sure that the GWC is there. And then, of course, once you have the right people in those right seats, you delegate and elevate. We want to grow our people. We want to empower our people. Now, anyone who knows anyone who is perhaps Buddhist understands what 555 is. That's balance. It's good karma. A lot of times somebody will wish someone good luck by just saying 555. Okay. And this in EOS is about the 3 things that bring balance. We have a person has the right core values. They have those rocks. They have objectives and they're in the right role. If we meet all 3 of those, we bring balance to a person in their position. And so we hit our 555. People analyzer, we have our core values. We have a list of people in our rows. Are they a plus, a minus, or a plus minus? It's a very simple way of saying, does this person really fit our core values? If people don't fit the core values, they're likely to fail or leave. We want to make sure we hire people. That doesn't mean we hire people that are all the same personality-wise or anything. We want diversity. DEI is a very important thing to have in any organization, but people have to have core value set that does work within the company. Another thing, and something that some people and companies I have known will put in without the full EOS suite, is a level 10 meeting. A level 10 meeting is called that because a 10 is a perfect meeting and we want 10 meetings. Your average meeting, if you rated a meeting that most companies have, is probably a 3 or 4, and that's on a good day. A lot of meetings are just a waste of time. Level 10 puts structure into those meetings. It organizes it by segue. It talks about scorecards. And to touch on segue for a second, segue is an introduction. Everybody that's on the meeting says one thing positive that happened to them personal, one thing positive professionally since the last meeting, which typically are weekly. All right, it really helps cement the team. Scorecards, let's update our data. If this is a weekly meeting, we have weekly scorecards. Let's update our data and see where we're missing. What are our quarterly rocks? Are they on track or are they off track? What about headlines for customers and employees? That's another thing that we track. And those aren't always positive. Sometimes we lose a customer. So maybe we want to raise that as an issue. Our to-do items, what was outstanding to do? Usually it's from the last meeting. Sometimes to-do items are longer term. Are they being worked on? Are the due dates accurate? Who has ownership? We don't just leave to-do items out there and hoping somebody takes care of it. Somebody owns it and is accountable for getting it done. And then maybe the single most important thing, 2/3 of a meeting, IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. So all the things that I brought up beforehand, they may raise issues, and we build an issues list. People that are part of this meeting add issues to the list. We rank them and we go through and discuss them and we come up with a solution. We assign an owner. Again, a very, very important thing. We don't just talk about issues. Somebody owns that issue. There's a deadline and they are held accountable for making sure that issue gets resolved. And at the end, we do a conclusion. And part of our conclusion is to rate the meeting we just had. And that's where we get our level 10. We are shooting for 10s. We would love to have that. But if we don't get it and we get something below an 8, why do we come in below an 8? And then one of the last pieces of EOS that's very important are clarity breaks. It's easy as a leader in a company to get really deep into working and not taking breaks and not just clearing your head. So we need clarity breaks. Sometimes a clarity break is, I want to clear my head, period of work. Maybe I want to just step back and think about my VTO, my vision traction organizer. I need to step away from that daily chaos. Let's clear our heads so we can make sure we're on the right track. We're not off on tangents, and everybody needs to have some clarity breaks. Now, these are some of the core components around EOS. EOS typically is 90 minutes into itself to really dig deep. Obviously, you just got a 10-minute spiel, if you will. And feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about EOS. It's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, if you will. The second component I want to talk about, our successful strategy, is Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean strategy is really interesting because Blue Ocean's concept is, why fight in the bloody red ocean of competition? Let's go find our little space. Let's find a place maybe where there aren't competitors that we can set up our own little market. Some great examples. Apple. Apple created the iPod and then the iPhone. And these were absolutely revolutionary at the time. The music CD stores, that business was dying. People were not going into stores and spending $20, $30 on CD sets. And Apple created an iPod where you could go in for 99 cents and you could get a song. Totally revolutionized everything. Surge in music, listening, and sales. iPhone, same thing. There was all these different cell phones out there, all the different models, different manufacturers, everybody doing all kinds of crazy things with phones and trying to out-innovate each other. And Apple said, yep, forget it. We're going to concentrate on the user experience. One phone, one user experience. And they revolutionized the market. Outside of technology, Cirque du Soleil. Everybody thought they were crazy. They came out and said, oh, the circus business is dying. Everybody wants to sit on their video games. They're not going to go to a circus anymore. Cirque du Soleil changed the rules. They brought a circus in that was also a show. It's like going to Broadway version of Barnum and Bailey. Totally revolutionized that business. Very successful. And one everybody's probably familiar with, CNN. When CNN came online, there was nothing like it out there. You had the 6 o'clock news. You watch for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, depending on the station. CNN came in 24-hour news, and everybody was, why in the world would you do that? Why would you do that kind of thing? Because nobody's going to sit and tune into news at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, they were wrong. All right. One of the concepts of Blue Ocean strategy is the only way to beat the competition is stop trying to beat the competition. Don't expend energy fighting everybody out there that's in this little market space. So what we want to do is implement what's called the 6 paths. It's a framework to look across alternative industries, look across strategic groups within an industry, look across your buyer chain, look at complementary products and service offerings, something that could be different. Rethink the functional emotional orientation of an industry, and participate in shaping external trends. That is one, if you think about, what did Apple do? They reshaped the trends. They changed the world. Cirque du Soleil did the same thing. Another component is ERRC, eliminate, reduce, raise, and create. The concept there, and this is all within a structured methodology. So the concept here is, what factors in our market should we just eliminate? You know, what are things that maybe we can reduce below an industry standard, but then the next thing is, what can we raise above that industry standard? And what can be created that's, you know, but maybe about a new industry standard? We're going to create something that nobody else is doing. And we go through this by looking at our competitors. So one of the things that we actually do is a canvas that looks at what the competitors are doing and where we are against them, so that we can look for opportunities to use our ERRC and change our game. Two components of that, as is strategy and to be strategy. The as is canvas is that self-analysis. And an as is canvas, we go through, and I would actually interview different people in our organization, looking at where we are, where people see our strategy is. And then from that and from our ERRC, let's create a to be canvas. Right. So on the x-axis, I have competing factors. On the y-axis, I have offering levels, and we can create a plot of our business against our competitors. And where do we want to be in our to be canvas? Where are we going to go? What's going to make us unique? What's going to put us in the blue ocean and do something different? Another element of blue ocean strategy are the 3 tiers of non-customers. Now, the 3 tiers are, maybe there are customers out there that are, maybe they're reluctantly or minimally using products and services. How do we get to expand our footprint? Our second tier are people who just, they don't buy products from our industry. They're not buying the technology or buying the service that we offer. How do we go after them? How do we do something different that attracts those non-customers who just really aren't participants? They're new. It's a greenfield. And the other is, the third are those customers who could benefit from something that our industry offers, but they haven't even thought about it. So how do we make them think about it? How do we bring something to the market that no one in this market has even thought about using? They're not seeing it as value. How do we bring something different in there? Because we can make that relevant to them. We can make it within their financial reach. Can we create a whole new market for ourselves that didn't even exist? And then the last part of it is the blue ocean strategy has the buyer utility map. Now, this is a grid. Again, it has what are called utility levers, and there's 6 of them. Is something eco-friendly? Again, products and services. Are we eco-friendly? What's the fun and image of what we're doing? How do we reduce risk? What's our convenience factor? What's the simplicity factor? Can we increase customer productivity? These are all rows. And then in the columns, these have to be refined based on your individual products and services, but examples might be purchase, delivery, use, supplements, maintenance, disposal, different ways that we can look at evaluating the types of things that we already have and who our buyers are. So that's a quick, again, 10 minutes on blue ocean strategy. It's really fascinating. BlueOceanStrategy.com is a website. They have a lot of different information. There's actually 2 different books, Blue Ocean Strategy, and the second one was a follow-up to that. They are really good books to listen to. And if you have a chance, Renee Mauborgne is a really great speaker. I've been participating with her on the COO forum before, and it's really a fascinating topic. Finally, something John talked a lot about, OKRs. So I want to talk a little more about that in detail. Objectives and key results. One of the things is that a lot of people talk about OKRs, but they don't necessarily understand there's actually a complete methodology behind successful implementation of an OKR system. First off, you have to define your objectives really well. If they're vague, then nobody's clear on what's going to happen or what needs to happen. You can't necessarily measure success or failure. So we need to make sure the objectives are very well defined. This is exactly what we're out to accomplish so that it's measurable. We need to be able to measure progress. If we set an objective up, and an objective could be a year, 2, 3 years in advance. And if you're looking back to, again, what John was talking about, I'm looking at 5 years down the road, I want to retire, then I need to build long-term OKRs. But they have to be measurable. I have to know on a consistent basis. And it should be at least quarterly, by the way, and that's part of our cadence. But we want to make sure that we're measuring success or failure of our OKRs. They also tend to be hierarchical. So there are dependencies at times if we look at this methodology. One OKR can't succeed unless 5 OKRs beneath it succeed. So you have to have a complete process around implementation of OKR. they have to be dependent on you. They can't be dependent on external factors. We can't say, well, we're going to set an OKR for vendor XYZ to do something. Well, we don't control vendor XYZ. We control our company. So what are we going to do to achieve our objectives? And our own performance is going to drive that. They have to be realistic. It's so easy, especially entrepreneurs are so overly optimistic at times. Oh man, we're going to triple our revenue in the next 12 months. Yeah, okay. You need to make sure that's realistic, because if it's not, then you start showing failure. If you're creating objectives and your objectives are constantly showing up as behind schedule, the measurables are showing we're not hitting our targets, or we're just flat failing, we need to rethink how we're defining our objectives, and are they realistic? Or maybe they are, and maybe we don't have, back to my EOS conversation, maybe we don't have the right butts in the right seats. Maybe we don't have the right people. And this is something that's important, that OKR, like with EOS and Blue Ocean, all three of these strategies are quite compatible with each other. They're not mutually exclusive, which is something I really like about them. So those are the three strategies that I wanted to talk about today, and that I think help us achieve things that go along our path to success, path to increasing our business valuation. And if nothing else, they bring order to chaos. And as anybody who's been involved with small business knows, as a business grows, chaos sometimes becomes the norm, and we want to stop that. So EOS in particular can help with that. But you bring in Blue Ocean, that lets us think completely differently. And then you bring in OKR to look more at your overall strategic objectives and our key results we want to get. Anything I can answer from that?
I perhaps have a few questions, if it's okay with you, Tracy.
Sure, of course.
So the first, and it's perhaps just a comment regarding the GWC.
Yes.
And yes, the book, itself, I read it a few times. I tried to implement as many concepts as possible. And here's what I discovered. There's also a little conflict, in my opinion. And the conflict is we're missing another C. It's a GWCC. And I don't feel the book focuses on compensation. You expect, get it, want it, capacity, working 60 hours. But I also feel you need to make sure, from a personal experience, that the compensation aligned with your expectation from that perspective. So I feel sometimes I kind of overlooked it in the beginning. I said, hold on, I would expect XYZ. I would expect 10 out of 10 meeting. I would expect the 555. But where does the compensation fall into all this?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you go to work for money. You would need that compensation. Yes, you want to fulfill. It needs to be a fulfillment, but at the same time, if the compensations are not right, it's not going to fall. It's not going to be aligned. That's just personal opinion. I don't know if John has any comments on that.
No, I think that's one of the areas that organizations struggle to get compensation aligned with the task, with the needs of the people. But I think the compensation conversation can actually be enlarged beyond that, because people are motivated by a number of things. And so it might be PTO instead of compensation, but certainly a sufficient level of compensation is required. And beyond that, there may be other factors that keep people engaged because they meet those people's needs more than an extra dollar. So compensation writ large is an important topic. You're absolutely right.
I think if I could add to that too, I think first off, I mentioned 60 hours a week. If you have somebody consistently working 60 hours a week, you got a problem, because that's not sustainable, especially in today's job market. But sometimes it's more that if I was COO of a mobile software company and I had people in 10 countries, So I found myself, at 10 o'clock at night having to be on a call with somebody in Singapore or something a lot. And so you have to have that expectation. And the compensation thing is a little bit about get it, but I think that's a huge, they have to understand fully the position and the value in the compensation plan too. But you're right. In today's world right now, there's a lot of demand for people. I know the job market softened a little bit from where it was a year ago, but it's still pretty darn strong. And if you're not compensating people and they're working very hard and they're hitting their rocks, or if they're in an OKR situation and we're hitting our objectives or getting our key results, and you're not compensating them well, you're going to lose them. And one of the keys, again, back to GWC, is I've actually made this mistake of promoting someone into a position that they thought they wanted, but they didn't get it. And 6 months later, they quit. I've actually done that. I've seen really good people disappear because they didn't get it. And so that's why I'm a huge proponent of GWC. But I agree with you. Compensation today almost needs to be another letter in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a personal opinion, because I always align it with Maslow pyramid, of hierarchy. I mean, you cannot go to safety and shelter and relationships if you don't fulfill the basic expected salary. I mean, that's just kind of my personal opinion, but definitely it's a very powerful tool to help us align with the company through a vision, and with the people through the data and the accountabilities.
You also, if you get into that, just as a quick follow addition to that, if you have a compensation plan where you are recruiting someone and you have the GWC and you find a person who gets it, they want it, they have capacity, and they'll work within that compensation range. Maybe your compensation was low enough that you just excluded yourself from the best candidates too. That's one thing you've got to watch. And I've seen that in the industry as well, where, hey, we had a great company, great ideas, but the compensation level is 25% below market. And you just can't keep people, or you can't begin to recruit the top tier people. So that's a factor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The second thing, and I kind of want to tie the knot between what John was mentioning earlier and what you, Tracy. John mentioned, I think, about 81% of the businesses in the US are small businesses, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I said small businesses contribute 52% to GDP, and 80% of the job creation comes from small business.
Exactly. And one thing about small businesses, they don't have the resources such as Apple. They don't have the capital such as Apple to kind of create a market for an iPhone or for a tablet. Most small businesses, based on my understanding, they could be 5 people up to perhaps 20 to 30 people. So my question to both of you today is, I don't have the resources like Apple does, and therefore I perhaps not necessarily don't have the innovation level, I just don't have the resources. How can I be competitive and take it to the next level, knowing the fact that I have limited resources, and therefore even my bottom line will be limited just because I'm a small business today?
So, Tracy, do you mind if I take a first shot?
No, please, John. I thought you probably would.
So I would say this: small businesses, Hewlett Packard, Apple, they all started in garages someplace, the metaphorical garage. By focusing on cash flow and proof of concept, if you're a small business that's not yet to a point where it's dominating like Apple is today, you position yourself to attract capital. And so by having your act together, having a proof of concept, demonstrating that you can live within your means and drive sales is a compelling story, Sargon, to attract capital. That capital in the early stages, as you well know, might be angel capital. That's expensive. But if you've got good focus on cash flow, you can, let's say your cost of capital, your options for capital may be less expensive as you move along towards getting the resources you need to become a unicorn.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with your concept as well. I just wanted to see what, yeah. How about you, John? How do you proceed that being a small business, and perhaps at one point, the capital is not just there, nor we're able to just simply create an iPhone or a tablet. What's your thought process?
Well, John had talked about that. I think from my perspective, my objective is always to build the most efficient organization I can, build those processes, build out the accountability chart right, and execute well in order to maximize as best we can our profits. That's something I always work towards. And if you have the organization and you're doing and again, going back to Blue Ocean strategy too, that I'm in a unique spot. I'm hoping that I attract the right attention too. I'm hoping that I'm trying to do organic growth, but maybe it isn't feasible because I really need to have some money. But if I could go to an investor and I say, look, I'm organized. Look at my accountability chart. And then look at the roles, the people we have in those positions. Let's look at our core processes and how we do things. Let's look at our VTO. Look at our vision, our core values, our market. We've really got our act together here, guys. Now, look at the market we've identified that we want to get into that maybe nobody else is there, or we can create our own blue ocean. If I do that, I am hoping that I can come in and attract the right investment. And if I don't attract investment, there's probably a reason, and hopefully I get a debrief as to why we weren't, selected for investment, and we can improve ourselves further that way. So for me, it's just getting those operational things together so that I'm only 50 employees, but I'm running a lean, mean machine that's very organized. And this is where a lot of small companies just flat fail. Most small companies, most startups fail, right? And they fail because they can't grow. Entrepreneurs are often not very good business people. They're dreamers, they're visionaries. You've read Rocket Fuel, okay? The visionary integrator model, right? You've got a visionary out there who's the dreamer. Henry Ford was the dreamer, right? He had no clue how to really execute. It was Cousins, James Cousins, who came in, and he actually ran Ford for 20 years, the first 20 years. Because Henry Ford would never have run it. Walt Disney's the same way. Walt was a brilliant innovator, but it was his brother who built Disney. Disneyland wasn't built by Walt. It was a vision he had. His brother built it. He was the COO. So that's something I think that's really important too, is you have that good leadership combination, that visionary integrator. I didn't talk about Rocket Fuel because that's a whole philosophical thing. But you need that visionary integrator concept. And then to add in what John said, you need the right CFO, the right money man back there who really understands the strategic way to approach corporate finance. If you've got those are the right butts in the right seats. Like you said, you've read Traction several times. That's a big phrase they use all the time. Get the right butts in the right seats. And if you do that, you're set up for success.
Absolutely. Just one final thing I want to add to it. I agree with you. You need the visionary, you need the integrator, and the right accountant, CFO. But to sum it all, we also need the right technology, especially in the event that we need to have good accountability in place. I need the right technology that I'm able to track progress. I'm able to track, for example, production or sales, or any of that can actually align with our vision.
I just heard an OKR, right? Yeah. You've got your objective, the right technology.
Absolutely.
And the thing you got to watch about technology, though, is sometimes technology is an emotional decision, and you've got to watch that. You make it based on data. It's like, oh, this is really cool. Now, I've heard great success stories there. I've read where a couple of businesses, and one recently was on a Rocket Fuel podcast, by the way, where the lady said she saw this incredible printing system. And she's like, I don't understand how this is going to totally fit our business model, but I can make money with this thing. And the CFO was like, yeah, but this is like $1 million investment. She goes, buy me one. He did. And within 3 months, she was making a huge profit off of this. And their business actually changed its focus some. And they've ended up buying a second one of these big printing systems. And that's the huge focus now on where their business went. There was a pivot that they made in the market. And that was a very much an emotional gut reaction response, which goes against quite a few things that I would, talk about on EOS, that it's all data driven. There wasn't data. This is a gut reaction that paid off, but they don't always. But technology is one of those. It's easy to see something and go, wow, that's really cool. I've got to have that. But you got to make sure you're making the right technology decisions. But if you're in a market, or you're even blue ocean, sometimes you've got to create your own technology or adapt existing technology too. So you've got to be flexible, find the technology, figure out how to utilize it and leverage it the best and most cost efficiently, of course, especially if you're on organic growth, man, you got to have every penny counts.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, well, gentlemen, we're down to the last 8 minutes. Any further comments on this? Any closing remarks? Sargon, thank you very much for joining. Your input is always just really an incredible contributor to these discussions, and thank you a lot.
Well, you demonstrate time and time again what a lifelong learner you are, always looking for answers, questioning your answers to get clarity. So I take my hat off to you, Sargon.
Thank you so much, John. A lot of respect for both of you guys.
Gentlemen, let's go ahead and wrap it up then. Thanks everybody for your morning and your time. And we'll be talking to you soon. I'm hoping the COO forum for Tampa Bay, the 3rd week of September, we're going to try to do another social event. I need to have it more over maybe in Clearwater this time. We've been doing it in Tampa, and hope to see you guys both. John, I know you're not on the COO forum, but you'll have to join us and maybe get to meet a couple of people in person that you've met in our meetings here.
I'd love to. So thanks for the invitation.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Everybody have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
See you.
See you.